Okay, let's convene the Iowa City City Council work session for Tuesday, June the 4th, 2019. The first thing I need to say is that I understand Mazahir cannot be with us tonight. I gather she's sort of in the thick of things in Sudan, and we certainly wish her the best, and the same would go for all the other people of Sudan. Beyond that, I don't know any details. Kelly, do you have any more information to add?
Not really, other than no internet, streets are closed, people are staying in their houses, so she said she'd get a hold of us when she had internet.
Yeah. Okay, well, there that is. The first item on our work session agenda is the 2019 to 20 Public Works and Parks and Recreation Capital Project Update. Wow, what a long descriptor.
It's a long
Hi, Julie.
presentation, too.
Yeah.
Hi, Julie Seidel-Johnson, Parks and Recreation Director. I'm going to walk you through a number of projects happening throughout Parks and Public Works. I'm going to go first because I need to scoot out of here for another meeting. I always have to start by saying what a great place to live and work. Thank you for all the support you've been giving to our parks and open spaces. And it's amazing for a department to have this many projects happening at once. It's also overwhelming a lot of days, but it's quite amazing. Kind of a theme that goes through all the projects is rain, wet conditions. You may have heard resident questions about how come my park hasn't been mowed. Well, we're struggling keeping up on all of the parks across the city. There's no special ones getting mowed more than others, other than realize a lot of the parks are actually drainage ways and are designed to hold water. So when they hold water, we can't mow. And same thing with the Highway 6, Highway 1 medians. There's some difficulties with that. But it seems to be getting better, knock on wood. We seem to be drying out a little bit, and let's hope it lasts for a few more days so we get caught up a little bit more. So I'm going to take you through a number of projects that are in the works right now. Some of them you're very familiar with. Some of them are smaller ones that are happening. We start with Riverfront Crossings. I wish I had a really nice picture of the nice greenery out there. It looks a little rough right now. That's why I don't have a new picture. We were just talking with the contractors from the first 3 phases about getting out there and getting some reseeding done and remowing. It's been a tough year with the wetness and that out here. Phase 1 is done except for a few punch list items. That's the trails, the wetland area, the tree planting, some of those things. A little bit of seeding left on that. Phase 2 is the nature play area. Once again, seeding and sodding is holding us up on accepting that, although it's open to the public. Phase 3 is the restrooms, the signage, and the lights throughout the park. All of those are functioning. We haven't yet accepted the restroom. There's just a few punch list items yet to go on that. And then later in the presentation, I'll show you the next phase, Phase 4, which we set the public hearing for tonight, too. And do you want to just ask questions along the way if I talk about a project you have some questions about? Next. How do we do that? Okay. Sorry. Small trail infill project, Highway 1. This is underway. They're doing grading right now and the utility work underneath, but that's in process. That's been a trail section we've been waiting for quite a while.
So this is north of Highway 1, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Could you go back to 2?
It's from Sunset to Mormon Trek, right? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Really excited for that project.
Willow Creek, Kiwanis, this is mostly the Willow Creek side, so the restroom, shelter, playground are gone now. It's a big mud pit at the moment, but the equipment, everything's coming in on time, so once it dries up a little bit, you'll see a lot of progress happening in that park. Probably take most of the summer to get the new playground, restroom, and shelter up and running there at that park. Lower City Park Adventure Play, we've issued the contract for construction on this. We have our kickoff meeting with the contractors this Friday, so you'll be seeing construction on that throughout the summer as well, and probably opening in the fall again. During that process, just so you know, the other playground is in Lower City Park will stay there and stay open until this adventure play is ready, and then we'll take it out at that time. So there will always be a playground there. East Side Sports Complex, this is just planting the tree buffer along the railroad side of this parcel to get it ready for future development. There are a number of residents now asking more questions about East Side Sports, just so you know, the master plan that was done a few years ago. This project, however, only plants the trees. We hope to have the planting done this fall. Design work is complete. We'll bid and plant trees next fall. City Park ball field improvements. This is a number of small improvements for City Park ball fields. This is one that is delayed at the moment. We plan to come back to it after the baseball season and into the fall. There's some lighting and some fencing and a lot of smaller things that will happen there. Our main athletic fields person has been on a medical leave for the last couple months, so we need to wait until he gets back to help with capacity to do that project. The ADA improvements in the rec center. This is the project of having the family restroom area or shower area added to the pool deck at Robert A. Lee, and then repurposing the racquetball and game room. And as you're aware, the bike library is no longer interested in having that space, so we will be developing it into more of a generic recreation/rental space for community groups and recreation programming. So more to come on exactly how that will be developed, but it will still take care of the ADA and access concerns, and I think make it a much better and more usable place for the public.
Hold on for a second, Julie. We haven't really discussed what could be done instead of having the bike library move into that space. Shouldn't we have some discussion about that?
We had two community groups respond to that, and Public Space One was the second group. They are working on acquiring both of the Gilbert Street homes. So with no other groups that expressed interest, I gave Julie the go-ahead to go ahead and frame that space out for, it's basically what I call a vanilla box. We'll be able to use it for programming. We still would be able to entertain third-party partnerships afterwards, but we didn't want to hold up all the work in the building by going out again when there didn't seem to be a whole lot of interest in the community to start with.
So if the bike library were to change their mind into the future, it would still be possible? It wouldn't
Yes.
preclude that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be possible, but I would mention that our basic vanilla box is a little bit different than what they were proposing. So the way we will level out the floor will make it so that it probably can't be the two-story that they had envisioned without additional work. So it's a lot less costly to just level the floor where it's at.
Yeah, I think this is, I'm not criticizing you or
Sure.
Jeff, but I think it's regrettable that the bike library decided that, they decided they didn't want to do it. And it's a puzzle because they've had trouble finding space and they've had to move around, and here we provide a perfect space, or at least what seemed to us to be a perfect space. And so I don't understand. So if any of you have really good contacts with the bike library people, talk to them and try to figure out what the heck they're thinking. And if they've made their firm decision, it's done, there's no question, well, there you go. But
Yeah, I was hoping that there could be at least some follow. I mean, I know that I had talked to one member who had just, I won't name her name, who did not know that it was even closed off, and so I don't know if there's any different voices within there, but I know that their executive director was the person that was doing the negotiating, so certainly if we can, for future conversations would be helpful.
I followed up with one of their board members who was involved in the discussions just to get a better understanding of what happened. I think the cost of the remodel that they were looking at was fairly significant, and while they have some reserves in place, they couldn't figure out how to close that gap because there's nothing for them to go to a bank and borrow. They don't have equity in this property. They don't own it. You're looking at kind of tenant improvements to a space, and they were looking at upwards of $500,000 in improvements that they wanted to do to that space, and they just didn't have the ability to do that. They had inquired with us about possibly buying the space, and I wasn't supportive of that. I think the city needs to maintain flexibility on that site. And they had also talked about the possibility of us serving as the lending agency and loaning them the dollars needed. And I responded that we didn't have funds identified for something that significant. It would be one thing to talk about a build-out grant, like a building change type of grant, but they're looking at needing a couple $100,000 at least in financing, and I didn't feel like that was something that we should be entertaining. I don't know what went into their design. They had a pretty elaborate design, as Julie alluded to. They were looking at 2 levels with an entrance off College. In my simple view of things, they certainly could have reduced cost to just use the box space that we were looking at with the floor level, as Julie was mentioning. I don't think, for whatever reason, they felt that met their needs. So they decided to move on. After talking with one of their board members, I don't think that they have a solid Plan B right now. They plan to continue to be in their space and continue to hunt, and we'll continue to keep an eye out for properties that might fit their needs. But it's going to be extremely difficult to find a spot better than this in downtown.
I'm sorry, I'm just mystified. I understand what you're saying, and I'm sure that's what people have said to you. But first thing I'd think about is scaling down the project once I realized it was going to cost $500,000.
So would I.
Yeah, so, oh well.
Okay.
Thank you, sorry for the
Yeah,
interruption.
no, that's okay. That's what I'm here for.
It's called the lamentation, right?
Okay. The next thing is right outside the doors of the Robert A. Lee Rec Center. The parking lot has seen much better days. We're looking at an entire rework of the design of the parking lot outside of the rec center. You'll see part of this summer as we have to provide access out of the Chauncey Swan ramp for the new building, the new condos. That affects the farmers market layout, and it affects how we need to add another driveway for that. So you'll see that part by August when the building opens. The rest of these renovations will be either in the fall or the next spring. And that includes some work with the creek as well, as stabilizing the creek, Ralston Creek behind the building too, or behind the parking lot, sorry. City Hall other projects, I love this picture. So those pipes, I hope you're not too attached to them.
Oh, man, don't
They have no functional purpose. They are decorative. So we're going to be removing those soon. So that's one very small project, but it'll be a big visual change on the outside of City Hall.
Well, just to play with this a little bit, I'd say the pipes actually add some architectural character to what otherwise would be a bland side to the building.
They do, but they're at the point where they've rusted in several places, and we either need to replace them, which is even more expensive
Yeah,
than simply
but they have no
moving.
purpose other than, yeah.
The other big project happening in City Hall, we crossed our fingers all through winter and made it through on one boiler. That's not smart here in Iowa. So the other big project will be replacing the 2 boilers. We will go out to bid on that later this summer with work kind of August into the fall so that we have better guarantee of temperature control here in City Hall and the building throughout the winter. Parks annual ADA accessibility improvements. So we last year finished Highland Park, Pheasant Hill, Mercer in the playground area, Villa Park, and this picture is of Tower Court, but it's actually the older picture, which is before the new paths were added in. So we've gone into all of those, done some very simple path work to include it, or to increase accessibility to the major features of the park. 2020, the 3 parks that are slated for this summer: College Green Park, which is a very small paving project to add a few spaces that need connections there. Probably will be our crews that end up actually doing those. Brooklyn Park needs quite a few extra additional paths to make the connections there. It's very wet right now, so we're not sure when we'll get in to do that one. Same thing with Hunter Run Park, some accessibility issues there with the playground and the shelter, and once again, it's in an area that's pretty wet. So this might be later in the fall before we get back to these, to do those. The rec center improvements, as I said, that is the ones we just talked about. Continuing with other concerns in the Robert A. Lee Rec Center, we're going to be replacing the fire and sprinkler system throughout with the ADA project. There's a number of other needs throughout that building, so you'll see us continue to chip those off. We need new ceiling tiles, need new replacement of the floor tiles. There's lots of smaller projects that we're trying to do to just continually upgrade and move forward with keeping the building up. Creekside Park, I'm happy to say it got seeded yesterday. So this picture was taken before the seeding, but the restroom and shelter are in place. The sport court or the basketball court is back in place. The park maintenance crew will be coming in to do the playground. We can't get in right now on this one. It's too wet, and we want to give the seating a chance. So it's very likely we will open the park in a few weeks without the playground there to start with, but I assure you the playground is coming. That's pretty cool, but it's going to take a little bit longer this summer to get that in place. Riverfront crossings, this is the next phase, phase 4. This is the traffic circle. So the sculpture by Kenneth Snelson moving from Terrell Mill Park down here to the main entrance. It will give us a bigger entrance sign going into the park, give us some landscaping and additional pathways in that northern area of the park. The grand opening for Riverfront Crossings Park is scheduled for July 20th. We're going to have some exciting news coming out about things scheduled that day. Unfortunately, Phase 4, this part will not be done in time for that July 20th grand opening. We will hopefully start construction on this shortly after that. The other downside to that is it means that right after we open our great new park, there will be some time periods where we actually have to close the entrance to do this work. So stay tuned. We're going to do our best to work around that. I think the trails will always remain open, but there could be some chances that there are some days that the parking lot will have to be closed since they're actually working on the entrance and the curb ramps and things right there. So that's coming. Hickory Hill Park and Trail redesign and redevelopment, that's coming along. Saw some preliminary orders for the signs today. Those haven't been ordered, so signs are 6 or 8 weeks out at least. The path work is moving forward, but once again, my theme, the wet conditions are making it difficult. At the same time, we've done a lot of work with the REAP grant funding that we've had to work on invasive species, prairie plantings, prairie burns, those kind of things are happening along with efforts by Friends of Hickory Hill. So a lot happening in that park, not quite as fast as we'd hoped, but it's happening. Community and garden improvements. So the gardens are up and functioning right now. All the spaces are rented. Things are growing fast there, so that's the one place we're happy to get plenty of rain. We still have 3 projects in the works for improving the gardens. They will happen next fall. So one of them is a redesign at Chaddock Green, and that's one that we worked with Backyard Abundance, did some neighborhood meetings in the area last year. The first designs were financially out of the ballpark for what we were hoping for. So we've gone back to the drawing board a couple times to kind of size those down to what we had funding for. So that'll happen in the fall. Walden Green, it will be a new garden area that's out on the western side by Mormon Track. That will go in the fall. And then Creekside, which you just saw, to the, get my directions right on that park, to the northwest side of the shelter, there was a residential lot. The neighborhood meetings in that area asked not for community gardens, but a community orchard space. So you'll be seeing us plant some more trees and do some, we also have money for some artwork there, kind of welcoming artwork. That will also happen in the fall. The Terry Trueblood Solar Project was one that you funded for this year. We're just in the process now of doing a consultant agreement to get a consultant on board to look at possibilities for that. So more to come. I just wanted to make sure you know it's on the project list. I hope to get it done probably, looking at Ron on that one, late summer, fall, maybe next year. We're not really sure until we get the consultant on board. City Park cabins, almost complete. The work on the cabins themselves has been done for quite a while, an amazing restoration of those cabins. What we've been waiting on is that when the restoration work was done, it raised the thresholds going into the cabins at the doorways higher than expected. There was more rotted wood there than they anticipated. So it caused a new, we had to redesign the pathways to provide ADA access. So I was told this week that we have the new design plans ready. They've been turned over to the construction company. So you should see those paths soon, and then that project will be complete. College Green bocce courts, also a new project that's in this fiscal year. However, I think we'll actually get to it shortly, midsummer to late summer. We had a group of individuals interested in helping fund these. There's some money in the operating budget, but 2 bocce ball courts that will go in at College Green Park, along with we're going to try 2 sets of the bag game, a cornhole, permanent. They were made out of concrete, so I think it'll be a really nice addition to that park for additional recreation amenities there.
Where will that be?
When will it be?
Where will that be?
Where will it be? So at the X, where the meet in the center, the shelter is here, and then just to the north in that open part of the open space. It looks like we can get it in without moving any or disturbing any of the trees. There's just enough space for the bocce courts there. And then it will be easy to provide little paved access off the sidewalk at each side. It works out quite nicely right there. So. We just saw like 60% designs on those today, so should be out to bid in probably a month. Mercer entry landscaping. This isn't a very good picture to show this, but at the entrance area to Mercer, we have kind of tired landscaping lights that don't work a lot of the time. So we will be replacing the lights. We're working on new LED lights that will go there, new landscaping to freshen up the building, and then the play sculpture that was downtown is the bicycle rack play. It was on the street. Anyway, downtown, that'll have a new location right in front of the building for bike storage in front of Mercer. So we're excited to get that added to that park. Chauncey Swan Park, crossing my fingers, it's coming, it's still a construction site over there, but they will be getting back to that, and that will be opening up as a public park this fall or next spring at this point. Playground improvements, these are the ones that we have on schedule for not this summer, but next summer. But I just want to bring them to your attention because we will start having our public meetings on these very soon. So first of all, Scott Park, which is what you see in this picture, that will get a new playground and shelter. And we have a public meeting scheduled for that one August 8th at the Party in the Park that is scheduled that night at Scott Park. And that'll be a chance for the neighbors to weigh in on the playground design. The shelters, we're using the designs from the park master plan, so they're staying consistent throughout. There'll be some input on location, although in lots of places what we're doing is either moving things out of the wet areas or moving them so we don't have to have as large of accessible paths to get, or as long accessible paths to get to the playground features. So we like to show the neighbors that what's happening, and usually we have 2 or 3 different playground designs for them to quote vote on. We take comments on it and get their ideas for colors and amenities that they'd like to see. So that's happening for Scott Park. Fair Meadows and Weatherby Park. So Fair Meadows is getting a playground replacement, which is just will be a tot-sized playground because of Grantwood Elementary's pretty cool big playground right next to it, and a new shelter there. And then Weatherby Park gets a new restroom, shelter, and playground. And Weatherby's quite a large space, so it's not getting a full park renovation there either. It's just that central area where the restroom, shelter, and playground are. And those public meetings will be combined on August 15th at Fair Meadows. That's the Party in the Park that night. And I've given word to the South District folks, and we're getting the word out about that. The 4th playground for next summer is Napoleon at the softball complex. That playground has a number of drainage problems, and it was closed most of last year just because of there's so much water, and it's getting to the age where there's some safety concerns as well. We met on that project today too, and we talked about it, and I think what we're going to do is look at replacing the major playground with smaller pods of play equipment plant around the softball diamond. So there won't be a central play area, but they'll have smaller areas near the concession stand and more, geared towards things that don't require as much safety service, are lower to the ground. Probably not a slide there. It swings and the spinner type things. So a little bit different concept in the works there. We'll show it to you as we get more work done on that. Mercer pool lighting, we're using some of the we're putting LED lights in here, so some of the sustainability money is going to replace these lights. The bigger concern is just the amount of lumens that they have on the pool right now. We need to upgrade it to meet current safety standards, so we will be getting all new lighting over the indoor pool. The other problem right now is anytime we have a light go out, we have to drain the pool to get to it in some of the center ones. It was a very poor design, and so we hope to get that fixed too, so that we have ability to change these things out when we need to. Big project, Mercer Scanlon. We did the boilers and HVAC last year, coming back in this coming year with a dehumidification project, and then addressing some of the building envelope or tuck pointing items on the outside of the building. Important that those happen together because actually the level of humidity in the building is causing a number of the problems with the structure around. So continuing there. Farmers Market, fun little art project funded in the operating budget, but partially from some public art committee funds. You'll be seeing this go over on the parking garage across the street. Just some artwork to identify it as the space of the farmers market, and then that little frame for a little photo op that can move, so that'll be in different places depending on the market. So it is scheduled to be installed by the end of June, so you should be seeing it soon. And then the little project, if you notice the bell is gone, it had some structural problems. We're pretty lucky it didn't fall on someone. So it's been sent, it's been sandblasted, recoated. We're getting limestone around the outside edges of the columns, kind of dressing it up again, and it'll come back as more of a focal point on the side of City Hall over here. So it's been that we've been adding more farmers market programming towards it, kind of drawing people over there. This will really finish that up. So that's the major projects that are on the screen. A couple of other smaller things that are happening that are kind of higher visibility things. We are going to be getting an outdoor table tennis and some shade at the top of the nature play area at Riverfront Crossings. We had some donations for that area last year that were to be used for those items, so we will be getting those in later this summer. We got windscreens coming over at the Mercer pickleball courts in partnership with the pickleball players. They are a growing group that's using that, and they use our gyms quite often, and that's an improvement they asked for, so they're working with us on that. We plan to use next year's CDBG funding to pave the path that is currently in the back part of Weatherby Park. That's one of the requests we've gotten from a number of neighbors in the South District. It's a gravel path through the park beyond the sport court now, so we hope to come in later this fall and get that paved. Villa Park, the playground is almost in. We're waiting for one more piece to finish the ramp on the main play equipment at Villa Park. But then we're going to come back later. We've got some more funding from that CDBG fund to put in a small shelter like the size you see at Cardigan Park or Frauenholz Miller, and a water fountain will be coming into that park too later this year. We have some park sign replacements happening. About 10 of them should be happening in the coming weeks at various parks. So we're moving them all to the new park signage that you've seen, like at the newer Riverfront Crossings or Terry Trueblood and a few others around town. So that will expand. We're also working to get auto locks placed on all of the park restrooms. So right now, to open up all our restrooms throughout the park system, we send out 1 or 2 temp or seasonal employees every single day to open them, and at the end of the day to close them. We are working to get those all on automatic locks that can be controlled remotely, so that staff will still go and check them every day, but it won't be necessary to necessarily change, open it and close them. It should make our operations much more efficient. We get a lot of calls from walkers and runners that would like them open as early as 5 in the morning. We just simply don't have staff on yet at 5 in the morning, so I think this will be a really nice operational change for the public too. We're also working on expanding Wi-Fi throughout the parks with a larger project of more to come on that. And we're changing refuse and recycling in a number of park locations. And I was joking today that I feel like we have to put a treasure map out anytime we move a garbage can because people are very attached to where their garbage cans are. The longer story is we're trying to get more efficient with it. We've gotten a new garbage truck for the park staff, which is great because it allows us to tip the garbage cans up into the truck without manually having to lift them each time. Well, with that, what we've tried to do is centralize more of the garbage cans and eventually recycling so they're closer to the restrooms or the entrances to the park. There's been a lot of public comment about that at our dog parks and the city park and some of the ones we've started with. But we're finding people are getting on board and understanding what's happening. But in the meantime, anytime we move a garbage can, we get a call, what happened to my garbage can? And that's the reasoning behind it. We are truly trying to make it more efficient. EAB, we've been out treating. You'll learn more about that in coming weeks. A lot of trees that we're looking at treating and unfortunately taking some big ones down. And then Natural Areas Plan, implementing that as we go through. We now have a contractor. I don't think we've issued the contract yet for prairie restorations in a number of areas and adding some additional prairie areas. And then invasive species removal in some of our primary wooded areas like Ryerson Woods. I don't think there's any more at Hickory Hill Park right now and a couple other locations. So we're finally getting rolling on getting all those in the works and just a ton of work happening throughout the parks. One last public meeting that's coming up. We have Snyder and Associates coming out to the Happy Hollow party in the park, which is July 11th, to do a public process and more of a pre-master plan. It's a few years out before that park will see more renovations, but we've been asked by the neighbors, what are we going to do with the donations that were brought in for that? What else is happening? So we'd like to bring them in and have that discussion to at least get a plan in place and talk about priorities for what will be happening there. So I'm out of breath because that's a lot. And
With regard to that park, Julie,
yeah.
I live a block and a half away from it. But I've noticed that there's kind of a wetland in back of
There is.
the duplex, or duplex owned by the Hayek family, I think. But is that still in the Hayek family's ownership, or has that been
I
transferred to the
believe it
city, or
is.
what?
I believe it's still with them, yeah.
Yeah, maybe they're doing it because they've let grass grow taller around. There are frogs there now, and it's really quite pleasing at night. But I didn't know if there was anything official that had been happening there. Okay. Anybody have any questions or reactions with regard to what Julie has told
Well,
us?
just reaction, I mean, there's a ton of projects, and good
so
good luck
fun.
staying on top of them.
Sometimes
Lots
it
of
amazes me how many details are in my head.
No, I mean, it's just lots of really, really good things. I think, with our park master plan and the implementation, things are going well, so thank you.
The rain has been a challenge,
Has
I'm
been.
sure, for a lot of this stuff, but looking forward to it, to its completions. Yeah.
With regard to Riverfront Crossings Park and the photograph at the top left here that we're looking at, I was down there a few days ago noticing how high the water was in the, what do you call it, the oxbow?
The horseshoe area, the oxbow.
Yeah, it looked like it was working exactly the way it was intended to work.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because it is functioning exactly as we were hoped for. Both the way that Ralston Creek runs through there, it meanders at lower times and it has an offshoot when it floods through, comes through in a flash flood. That's working well. We're experiencing a little flooding into the nature area, but that was to be expected. And so far, the Iowa River has stayed out of the park. So. Yeah, it's functioning well. And I think that's the case. As frustrated as we are about mowing right now and the conditions out there, we're seeing things start to work in all of our flood projects. City Park is getting flooded on the edges, and we're seeing that. I think that leads to further discussions of how we continue to move things up from the river's edge up towards the hillside. But I think the playground and some of the things we're already starting are great movements for that. It's been an interesting spring, so.
The wettest spring in recorded meteorological history here.
Yeah, something
I think.
like that.
I mean, it was the second wettest 4 days before the end of May. Anyhow, I was referring to May when I said that. But I think it probably ended up just above the other two, but we'll see. Okay, any other observations or anything?
I was a little disappointed on the Creekside Park Garden. How extensive was that review process, and how was the public input solicited that the orchard was chosen over the garden?
Sure. So, as you remember, we contracted with Backyard Abundance to hold the neighborhood meetings, which they did last summer. What we heard from the neighbors is that they really had gardening space in their own yards around that area, so they didn't feel the need for additional gardening space there. But as a group, they wanted to have more of an orchard space so they could try and learn that as a new edible landscape there. So it really was driven by the neighbors that came to that park. And I think it's a good choice for that particular site. I think it offers something new and different. There are still, I think, a few raised beds that will be available there, but the majority of it is this orchard. Yeah. It's a little different than what we've done, but I think it'll be nice.
Okay, good deal. Well, you have plenty more work to do. You better get out there and do it while it's still sunny. Thanks, Julie. Hi, Jason.
Good evening. So we'll shift gears here a little bit, focusing on public works projects. And just starting out, one thing I wanted to point out is this list or showing here is really those projects that are under construction or we expect to be under construction here shortly. There's a whole other group of projects that are under design for not only 2020 but also 2021. We started on some of those as well. So again, these are really focused on those projects that are currently under construction. So we'll start things off with the West Riverbank stabilization. As you know, this is a project that will include riprap, retaining wall along the West Riverbank, just north of Highway 6. As it's been mentioned, it's been a wet spring. So this one's been, for the most part, been on hold for a lot of the spring. They had gotten out there, removed some of the vegetation and the trees. That was due to the bat habitat and making sure that's down in time. We got that removed, and now it's kind of been sitting, waiting for the river to recede, and then they'll proceed with that work. We do keep an eye on it to make sure that we're not losing any more riverbank while it's sitting there. So far, it's been holding up pretty well. But again, we continue to keep an eye on that.
Jason, how's the East Riverbank? I noticed taking the bike trail down to Terry Trueblood, there were a couple of spots where it seemed it's kind of a sheer fall, not too far off the edge of the trail.
Yeah, and I think on the east side, and somebody else may be able to chime in if I'm not covering everything, but I believe on the east side there's a little more protection on some of that section of the bank, and we also aren't seeing quite the same degree of erosion there. So we continue to keep an eye on all those areas.
Okay.
The areas that I'm guessing you're speaking of are behind where Durham Bus Service is, kind of south of Highway 6, north of the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
Those are areas that we've had issues with in the past during flooding events. We're currently working with the Parks and Rec staff to try to figure out a way to get some riprap in there. Mm-hmm. There's some low clearance issues, and with it being as wet as it is, we'll have trouble bringing riprap down from the north end without tearing up the trail. So it's just kind of, it's a wait and see right now to be able to get that material in there, get it protected.
Okay, thanks.
All right, anything else on that one? Moving on, the equipment shop parking lot overlay. This is one that is actually included in a project that you will have before you tonight to set the public hearing. So with our annual asphalt overlay project, this one will be included. It's pretty straightforward, an overlay of the parking lot, which certainly is in need of some repair. The West Park Lift Station rehabilitation, this is one that we're actually doing in-house with our wastewater staff. They are basically going through, this is a lift station located in City Park, going through and rehabbing that and upgrading the sort of the guts of the lift station down there. First Avenue water main replacement, this is one you may have seen here recently. It's just now kicking off. This will include new water main from Court Street down to Friendship, also include some work just east of the First Avenue and Court Street intersection. Those improvements are associated with the pressure zoning that we're looking to do with our water system. So this will include some lane closures on First Avenue, as well as there will be a closure of Court Street for a period of time as they're doing those improvements. So completion of this, we're looking at, the goal would be to have that done before school starts in the fall. Annual stormwater improvements. This is an annual project that includes a number of projects. We're just getting those started. We actually took bids on the first one today, which will include some storm sewer repairs on Peterson Street. We have a bid later this week to include some work that needs to happen down by the wastewater plant. We have a couple more projects planned for later this year. Among those will be a drain tile project, which have been popular, obviously, with the wet weather, that we have done those a lot of years to kind of those areas that continually have problems with sump pump discharges or other issues. So we will have a drain tile project later this year, as well as a couple other ones. Another one that will come up will be some intake repairs that will happen on Dodge Street. Traffic calming, this is one, again, an annual project that we work on throughout the city. This year, what we're working on is we do have an installation of speed humps that we will be doing on Highland that has been approved. There's also a number of other sites that are currently in the program or kind of working their way through to determine if they'll end up with a project or not. One other one that is out there is a section of Glendale that we're working on too, looking to see what options we might have there. I believe speed humps were not an option or not a preferred option in this location, and so we're working through what we might be able to do for a temporary project, looking at maybe some medians or something like that. And what we would do is put those out there for a period of time, let people kind of see how they work, see if it's something that they'd be interested in, and then if there is support, then we would look to possibly move forward with that. Curb ramps, ADA, this is another annual project where we do curb ramps, again, throughout the city. We are just wrapping up the project from last year. The big one included here is the bump out there at Jefferson and Lynn. That was included as part of this project. Last year's project is more or less complete, just finishing up some of the restoration work with that.
I'd like to say something about the bump out. I think that's a really good improvement. I'm very happy to see it. It's one I know I've mentioned it many times in prior meetings, and I've heard many people talk about how difficult it is, challenging it is to cross that particular intersection because, for one reason or another. So I'm happy to see the bump out.
Sure. Annual pavement rehabilitation, again, you'll see this one tonight as we set the public hearing for this year's asphalt overlay project. Just to point out some of the locations that are there, we're looking at Newton Road up near the university. There'll be a section of our Park Road, Fersen intersection also is in need of some repair there. There's a section of Clinton Street, which I believe is Court down to Benton. There is a section of Fair Meadows Boulevard from Hollywood Boulevard to Highway 6. And then finally, Gilbert Street for the Kirkwood Avenue intersection to the south. I believe it's down to 3rd Street, that section of asphalt as well. Annual bridge maintenance and repair. This one, right now, we are currently going through, every 2 years we go through into our bridge inspections, so those are underway right now. With this cycle, we'll be looking at doing a master plan to kind of help us set up for what we would have for over the next 5 or 6 years for those bridge projects. One thing that will help with is funding. Obviously, as we add projects to the list for available bridge funding, this will help with that process. We also have plans for some repairs to Iowa Avenue Bridge, and then obviously there's some bridge replacement projects we have in the works as well with Prentice Street and 2nd Avenue. Annual sewer main replacement. This is, again, an annual project that focuses on a couple different things. One, we have spot repairs. We are finishing up this year's project. We had, I think there was about 9 sites. Those have been completed, just working through the punch list and restoration work there. Also been working on some sewer lining work. We are down to, I think there's 2 sites left for that one and should have that completed by the end of the month. Bicycle master plan implementation, this is one that has been in the works for a little while and will be continuing. I think for the most part, the ones that we are working on to date have been involved in other projects. I believe there is one section of Governor Street, basically from Burlington down to Bowery, that we will be trying to figure out if we can incorporate it into another project or if we need to do that separately. As we look out, we're also looking at doing an RFP to help with some of the projects that will be, get somebody to help us with the design for the projects over the next couple of years. Public Works Facility. If you've been down there lately, it's really coming along. They got more or less the building shell is up. Like a lot of projects, it's been a wet spring, so it's kind of a mud hole down there. But it is progressing and it is coming along. So I'm still looking at having that complete yet this year is the plan. The landfill leachate pumping system. So again, this is a leachate and gas collection system. A lot of the piping work has been complete. Right now, we're looking at really kind of the SCADA system, so the communication and the ability to communicate with the rest of the system and do stuff remotely is kind of the work that we're working on right now. The Myrtle and Riverside intersection signalization, this is obviously is one that was done in conjunction with the overlay of Riverside Drive. As far as the Myrtle and Riverside piece, a lot of the curb ramps and the turn lane have been installed, the median has been installed. Really what's left for this intersection is the signal work and then also the overlay of Riverside Drive.
And the overlay is going to take place next year, is that right?
The overlay will actually be, I think they are planning to start on the 9th with the overlay this year. We're probably looking at that being, I'd probably say maybe end of June-ish would be kind of when we'd be looking at completion of that overlay. Riverside Drive pedestrian tunnel, this is one, plans are more or less complete. We're working our way through the property and easement acquisition now, so once we have that in place, then we would be ready to proceed with construction. Plan right now is still to hopefully get that done yet this year, but we're just kind of waiting our way through that process. As I mentioned, Riverside Drive and Governor Street overlay. So the Riverside Drive piece, again, starting later this month, hopefully have it done by the end of the month. The Governor Street overlay is more or less complete, working on some restoration stuff, but the overlay, the bike lanes have been striped. So that is more or less complete. The one part of that project that still remains is there is still a plan to do some repair to Dodge Street. You'll remember that was a joint project with the DOT, and so it's really DOT maintenance of Dodge Street, but we're working with them on that to get that done with the project, and then we will also stripe bike lanes on Dodge Street as well. So that part remains, but hopefully we'll get that squared away here soon.
Jason, I got a quick question on the bike lanes, and I meant to call Jeff or somebody just ask about it. When you go up Governor and the signage is for the bike lane to go in towards the cemetery and go up Summit Street instead of going down that steep hill where the road narrows. But the signage doesn't appear to me to be as much maybe as it needs to be. I mean, if you're a bicyclist and you're just kind of head down riding, there's no like arrow in the bike lane that the bike lane is ending and you need to turn right.
Sure.
There's like a street sign almost right at the intersection. So I would just throw that out as a suggestion to be looked at. And I don't know what the standards are in terms of signage within the bike lanes, but I can easily see somebody actually getting past that intersection, hitting the brick, and like, oh, wait a minute, I was supposed to turn, and they're already past it. So
Yeah, we can take a look at that.
It's just a picky
Yep,
little
and
thing,
that's
but-
certainly where that transition from that bike lane to that bike boulevard that does peel off there. You're right. Yep.
So.
Okay. Anything else on this one?
So with Dodge, I mean, coming down Dodge is pretty rough in spots, and so, but that's not up for another overlay then, or?
So there will be some improvement there. The DOT has some money set aside. It's not enough to do all of it, and so we're trying to figure out what we're able to do with that and how best to use that money to make the best repairs we can.
Down around the corner.
Yeah. Luckily, in an out year of the CIP, we do have a reconstruction of Dodge Street, so that's on the horizon, but we're just kind of trying to patch our way until then.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Idlewild, this is one you've heard about before as well. So this one, we're about 90% plans, getting close to having that wrapped up. We are working through the appraisal and easement acquisition process now, so this is another one where I think we'll be ready to go here shortly, and then once we have those easements in place, then we would proceed with the project. We're hoping to get that underway yet this fall. The picture is not right on this one, but the equipment shop roof replacement, this is one we actually are, I believe, is out for bid right now. So this will be a replacement of the equipment shop roof. Again, it's past its useful life and certainly need of repair. So the picture's incorrect, but that's the project. Burlington and Clinton intersection improvements, this is one that's been a long time coming. The sidewalk or the curb ramp and signal improvements are done. The roadway improvements are done. They're finishing up the restriping of the 4-lane to 3-lane conversion in addition to bike lanes now. I think there's some things we have to kind of tweak there, but we're getting close. One thing I will note is I believe it's the southeast corner there by the Hieronymus site. Sort of final completion of that will likely be done when their building is complete, but there's ramps in place now, so the intersection is usable, but that's kind of the final completion would be done with their project.
Speaking of the building, it's pretty amazing, to me at least, to see that they're continuing construction. Apparently all the difficulties were worked out after the fire. I thought it would take them many more months than this to do that.
Certainly a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
What's the anticipated completion now for that?
For the building,
They're about 3 months behind schedule, so I would guess that later this summer or early fall, we'll be coming to you asking for an amendment to the development agreement, because the development agreement contemplated a December 31st completion date, but the fire set them back about 3 months.
pedestrian mall reconstruction. So we're in year 2 of that. Phase 1 and the Blackhawk Mini Park are substantially complete. There is still some work on the stage canopy that's occurring that was from a previous phase, but they are more or less in phase 2. They continue, so that's the east-west section. They've been alternating kind of the stuff up against the building and the stuff in the middle, just to, again, to kind of keep access to the businesses through that stretch. So looking at completion later this year. Foster Road extension, this is one that's part of a development project, but certainly been involved from inspection and some of the coordination, I guess, as they work through that. Utility work is progressing. Last I had heard that they're pretty more or less on schedule with that. With the wet weather, obviously they're, like everybody else, trying to maintain that schedule, especially for paving, but looking at completion yet this year. Mormon-Trek conversion, this is one that we had started last year. They've done a lot of, the mainline paving or repairs were done last year. Now they're focused on the intersection, so they've been working at the Raritt Road, Mormon-Trek intersection. They'll kind of work their way to the north, again, focusing on the intersections, not only pavement repair, but also curb ramps. At the same time, they're also doing signal replacements. They still have to restripe from 4-lane to 3-lane. Also, the roadway lighting north of Melrose on Mormon-Trek is yet to come. We're looking at completion, I think we're aiming for probably end of July for that project. Gilbert Street improvements, don't have to go far to find this one. It's I think here with the water main work, that is more or less complete. So they are moving on to street patching as well as curb ramps. There will also be signal and lighting work. That will be a little bit further behind just due to the lead time of getting the poles and mast arms and all of that. So hopefully they'll get some of the other work completed and there'll be a short break there until those materials are delivered and they can get that completed. So we're probably looking at completion later this fall. Again, we'll be dependent mostly on when those materials come in.
What's the project cost on that?
I don't have that in front of me. I want to say it was about $1 million.
It was a little over $1 million.
Sidewalk infill is another one that you have on your agenda tonight to set the public hearing. So this will be sidewalk on the north side of Rochester, basically between our ground storage reservoir east to, I believe it's St. Thomas Court. So install sidewalk infill section there along the north side of Rochester. The Iowa City Gateway project. This is one, obviously, we've been talking about for quite a while. We are getting down to the end, punch list items for the most part, some work that still remains to be done. They have some signal work that needs to be done. They also have, so there's also some railing that we need to have installed, and then I think the biggest piece that's left is the end treatments for the arches. I think we've worked through, we have the design in mind and what we plan on that being, which would include some planters and some railing to blend in with the rest of the bridge and the surrounding area, working with the contractor with the goal to get that done yet this year.
Jason, where does the bike trail that goes under the bridge, where does it stand?
I believe that is completed. I believe they were working to backfill that this week. So I think the trail is in. They're working on restoration now. Highway 1 trail, Julie had mentioned. Wastewater treatment plant, electrical distribution. So again, this is upgrading the generator and some of the distribution down at the wastewater plant. This is another one that's really been affected by the wet weather. They've had a lot of issues with dewatering on the site, but they continue to plug away. I believe the generator should come in later this summer. So they're working on some of the switchgear stuff now, and it is progressing with completion later this year. Landfill gate, this is one that came up unexpectedly. Weren't aware of it. There was a vehicle that had hit the landfill gate. It's probably been a couple months ago. We had actually bid out a project to replace that, and I can't really, if we didn't receive any bids or we received one that was really high, so we've put that back out, talked to contractors to get a better idea of how to make that more competitive. I think we've extended the time frame there for completing that, but really it's a replacement of the landfill gate that was damaged as part of that incident. Miller Avenue sidewalk and retaining wall. This is over by Benton Hill Park. This was a project that would install basically a sidewalk on the east side of the park. There was sidewalk recently constructed with the development just south of there, so there's kind of a gap between that and the sidewalk along Benton Street. This will fill that in. If you've been out there with the grades, there's certainly a need for a retaining wall to get that sidewalk in. Again, another one that's been a victim of the wet weather. They're pretty much ready to go as soon as it dries out enough to get that wall construction. They had actually started a little bit this spring and ended up having to take some out just due to the wet weather.
So with regard to that part, Jason, it seems to me, just observing it, that the improvements are all needed. So I'm glad that they're taking place. But the construction work's been really harsh on that park. I thought it used to be a pretty lovely park, and it is not right now. So I'm hoping the landscape improvements or modifications after the sidewalks put in and the retaining wall and all that kind of thing will restore the park to some of its aesthetic character.
And that's, a lot of times that's a challenge, especially with the timing of the bat habitat and that stuff. And, there's that desire to get those trees down right away in the spring. And so as the construction work goes, they'll come through and clean it up, and then certainly will look different than it does now.
How high will that wall be?
I don't know exactly. I believe it was in the neighborhood about 5 feet at the highest point.
Will it require a fence on the top?
There will be, yes. And that is all I had for the projects. One thing I did want to point out, obviously these are our capital projects. In addition to that, there's also a lot of development work that's been going on. I believe within Public Works and especially in engineering, we're looking at also being involved with about 8 subdivisions currently, as well as about 21 site plans. So I didn't list those individually, but obviously it's stuff that we're involved with as well. But yeah, another busy year. So. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Out there.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jason. All right. Does anybody want to say anything about any of the review we've just had?
I mean, I would just say I think it's indicative of the good planning that our staff does. I mean, some of these things are related to strategic plans we've done, like Bike Master Plan and Park Master Plan and stuff, but there's an awful lot of it that really is on the backs of just staff in terms of knowing what kinds of things need to be updated, improved, repaired, you know, that sort of stuff. So I just want to commend staff for their, you know, planning and foresight and organization and coordination to pull all this off, and I'm sure it includes Dennis as well in terms of finance of how we schedule and how we do these things. So I just want to thank staff for their efforts on that.
I guess I'd want to mention a couple of things. One is I was on Clinton Street yesterday at a certain point and was really, I knew the north and south parts of the restriping had been done, but I noticed that the striping from Jefferson Street to Burlington it had been partially completed as of yesterday. It may be entirely finished by now. So I'm really pleased to see that, and I look forward to both driving my car and riding my bike on that to get a feel for it, see how it works. Yeah, but I'm really pleased to see that the striping's been done. The other thing I wonder about, which you did not have a chance to touch on, Jason, is the project we have that involves inventorying road conditions that would enable us to have a list of priorities basically for rehabbing and repairing, et cetera. Where does that stand?
So we are working with a consultant. We're just about to the point to have that consultant agreement ready to go. The plan is to have that evaluation, at least have the findings of that ready for the next budget cycle, to at least have that kind of help us with planning of projects. So I don't know if we'll have the full report done, but we've told them that the goal would be to at least have them some recommendations for the 5-year CIP.
Great, thanks.
One thought I was just having was on Governor, where, you know, by installing the bike lane with the buffer, the traffic lane widths have been reduced as a consequence of that. And I don't know if we have any data prior to the project in terms of what we saw in terms of traffic speeds, but I'd be interested to know if, I've been emphasizing the importance of lane width with respect to traffic speed, so it would be interesting to see what, if any, change there has been. I mean, it certainly does seem, going from a 15-foot wide lane to, I don't know what it is now, maybe 11, should make a significant difference in terms of how people drive that corridor. I mean, I know when I'm on it, it certainly seems more right-sized than it was before.
We can check that.
Okay, nothing else? If there is nothing else, we can move on to clarification of agenda items. We have a pretty short agenda, so I don't know if we have anything that needs clarifying, but if we do, speak
Well,
out.
I'm not sure if my late handout, I guess it could be considered correspondence.
But you could bring it up now, I
Yeah.
think. Why not?
It wasn't clear to me when I saw the late handout if it was given a number 8 point something, but in any event, I included that because, now that the trees are leafing out, I've been, I must say, shocked at what I'm seeing. It certainly appears that more ash are pretty seriously infected than I had thought, and so I just wanted to raise that concern. I read parts of the tree management plan, which spoke about, if you had a chance to look at the appendix, what the goals of treatment would be, and I'm feeling that our ability to be able to comply with those guidelines is a concern to me. I don't know exactly where we are with respect to the assessments, and in fact, one thing I would want to ask is if, for example, with those streets with ash as the dominant specimen, to carefully assess what conditions we're talking about, because, those are the streets, as was noted in the appendix, where you're going from, full canopy to zero, potentially zero canopy. And so all aspects of that canopy, its environmental, its aesthetic, and so forth, go from full value to zero value. There's a dead tree in North Market Square. It's a lot happened over this past winter in terms of seeing the effect. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. It's I feel we've we'll do the best we can, but I feel the treatment is at least a year late in terms of giving us more control over the outcome.
John, on a related point, my recollection is that the staff has indicated that it would be injecting, 400 of our ash trees? That's what I remember. And that there was the ones that would be injected had been identified as a result of investigation by the staff and by some outside help. But I don't think we've seen a map showing the locations of those 400 trees. But I know we can get a map that shows that. It would be good to see it, I think.
Yeah, it's sitting in my inbox here, so either in the Thursday info packet or the following Thursday info packet. But prior to your next meeting, we'll have an overview of our chemical injection process, and we can include a map with that. And you can feel free to ask questions at that next council meeting based on that info packet. But John, you're absolutely right. As we've engaged with the contractor, they're going around and looking at some of these trees and saying, you don't want to waste your money on treatment. This one's too far gone. And I gave you heads up on 3 on Washington Street that we'll be removing that are significant, and there's others too. But our contract calls for the treatment of up to 400. That's what so we'll show you what ones we're looking at. But we do have some flexibility to bring some others in as we're scratching some off the list.
Yeah, and finally, one thing I mentioned in correspondence with Jeff was, depending on how this plays out, but on those streets where we have, full canopy loss, I think the selecting trees to achieve in as short a period of time as possible, again, not necessarily going with monocultures because we've, seen how that can end up, but selecting trees so that restoring the effect is accomplished in as short a period of time as we can. Because if you've lived on a given street with a full canopy for 30 years and you see that canopy disappear, that's quite a blow.
Yeah, one such street is Davenport, as you know, and it can be devastating for sure.
I think it'll be interesting when we get to that point to see what staff's recommendation is, because I know Julie certainly has talked about a real diversity in terms of the species that we use, and some of those certainly are going to be faster growing trees than others. And I think we've got to look both short and long term, that we're not putting a bunch of stuff in that's really fast growing, but then some of those really fast growing trees, 20 years or so is kind of their lifespan. So
I'm not suggesting that every single tree be a fast-growing tree, but, at the same time, I think they need to be part of the mix.
you don't want all oaks that are going to take
Yeah, right.
70 years.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, but
Okay, any other agenda items?
yeah, we can discuss this in the formal, but I'm having a little trouble understanding number 12, this support for the developing local food hub, in terms of what it is we're getting that isn't already being provided in the community, and why is this coming up now and maybe not part of an aid to agencies process? How was it outside of aid to agencies that all of a sudden we've got this 45,000? So I get a little better understanding because the memo didn't give me quite enough, I guess.
Sure. Okay. So we recognize that the local foods funding that has been budgeted over the last several years had not been expended. There were a variety of projects that were kind of brought up in the past as a potential use, and ultimately there wasn't a major project or a use over the last several years for local foods funding. So we decided to investigate what our opportunities might be to utilize those funds and create an environment in which we can provide better access for people to have local foods, or to support the regional local foods economy that would be supporting people, like providing local foods through contracts with the school district, or providing that to other local institutions that Michelle Kenyon from Field to Family, the recipient organization, is going to be here to discuss exactly who they serve and in which circles they operate, the kinds of contracts that they come to, that they would use with the local food hubs. So that was the thought that we can discuss and further explain. But that's the gist of it.
I'll wait till the formal then. Thank you.
I think the key is with that is we had a separate funding source, and the council has a strategic plan goal of growing the local foods economy. So we did a mini aid to agencies RFP, saw what kind of proposals were out there, and we felt this was the best. So it's 4 or 5 months in the works.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Other items? Okay, I have a couple I want to bring up. One is item 7F in the late handout, which is the 2019 asphalt resurfacing project. So I don't have any objection to any of it, but I just observed that some work will be done on Dodge Street between Burlington and Bowery. And if I read correctly, that will result in the removal of 40 on-street parking spots, right? So I don't object to that, but I imagine that there are some residents who live on that street who might. So I think just we need to be conscious of that. And I know we're only setting a public hearing for our next meeting, but it's, yeah.
One thing I would just note is they would, both the property owners and the residents will receive notification ahead of the public hearing, so they would have the opportunity to speak at the public hearing about that issue.
Is that to improve traffic flow?
So basically what it is it's a way to, the parking will be replaced with a buffered bike lane. Okay. And so it will go, that's essentially what would happen.
It's a project in the bike master plan.
Yeah, so it's important to notify the neighbors, the residents, and so that they have a chance to speak about it if they want to. I also wanted to mention one other thing that could require the help of Dennis. Item 6C, the approval of inter-fund transfers. So I only bring this up because it's a new requirement resulting from legislation passed this last session. I wonder if you could help us just quickly explain and help us make sure we know what's going on here.
Sure. This is something that was a change in the administrative code. And as part of the budget process, we do a number of administrative transfers, like we transfer road use tax funds to the forestry division to help pay for our forester. We transfer employee benefit funds levy to the general fund to cover employee benefits. We transfer funds to the MPOJC. We have a whole range of transfers that we do, and due to an incident in a small community, for a transfer of utility funds, they decided to change the administrative code that now requires that all interfund transfers be adopted by a city council resolution. So we're kind of working our way through how we're going to make sure these resolutions get adopted prior to, putting those transfers on the books. So right now, we're going to take all the remaining transfers for the year. This actually went into effect in the middle of April. And have those all adopted by resolution, and then you'll see another one come forward, probably in either later this month or early July for the transfers for fiscal year 20. And those will be like a not to exceed amount because we do some of those quarterly, some monthly, some as needed. Some we don't know the amounts until we actually receive hotel motel taxes or other events take place. So, as we go through the next fiscal year, we're going to just have to evaluate that as far as, are there transfers that need to take place that were not included in that resolution, amounts that are changed or amended due to maybe a project comes in over or under what we anticipated. So, through that administrative code, we're just having to work through that impact on what we're doing and the timing of it.
Great, thanks. Would anybody like to ask Dennis any questions about that?
I just wonder what was the concern that was had for documenting this?
We went to a training session in May from the State Auditor's Office and the Department of Management. And it was just my understanding that a small community transferred enterprise funds or utility funds to the general fund. And some of the residents had concerns about this that I believe were addressed at that level. However, due to that taking place, they decided to impose this upon all of the communities and jurisdictions to now have to essentially run all of our transfers through resolution.
Boy, I used to do this with my sons. One son would do something wrong and
Everybody gets punished.
punishment would be directed toward both of them. I'm only kidding, but it feels that way.
And real quick, too, how typical is it that statutes become effective April? I noticed we've had a couple now that have been April. Don't they usually do July 1st or not?
I don't know if this was actually done by statute as administrative. I believe the Department of Management came up with this administrative change, and they made it effective immediately, which was almost impossible because, as far as I know, we didn't even receive communications about this until we went to the training seminar, and essentially they said, well, it was too late for April. However, any transfers in May would fall under that administrative code. And so I assume as when we do our annual audit, part of that annual audit is a compliance audit, and they would review our transfers to ensure that they complied with the administrative requirements. So that's why we kind of had to rush into getting this done, because it just really came about with short notice, or virtually no notice, actually.
Seems to be a trend lately, right?
Okay, so we can probably move on to the information packets. May 23rd packet. Anybody have any questions or whatever, reactions?
I just think the police department report, I think there's lots of good information there, and want to congratulate them on a couple of really important grants that they got this last year, the one on strengthening law enforcement response to domestic and sexual violence. It's a national demonstration initiative. They want 6 sites, I think, in the country doing some work with that. And then the Data-Driven Justice Initiative, which was extended, which we've had that for a little while, that Dave Schwint does a lot of work on, has been just a significant piece of being able to do our Housing First project and gather data from that and really see the effects of some of the different programming. So a new mission statement, which I think is a very positive change. And just so it's always good to see this information.
I see a lot of valuable information farther on in the report that the chief does not refer to directly in his overview. Like total calls for service are down for the 3rd straight year. Arrests have steadily declined by 30%, by a total of 30% since 2013.
But to interrupt you just a second, Jim, what I did find interesting was, there's nobody here to answer the question. I'm not sure that Chief Matherly could, but you said that total calls for service are down the last 3 years, but look how much they're up from 2012, 2014, and 2015. I just found that really interesting. I mean, 12 was at about 65,000, 2013 was about 70,000, then it went down to about 67, then 65, then it's jumped up to 71, 70 and a half, just over
Yeah,
70,000.
true enough,
So
yeah.
it was just kind of interesting. I'm glad to see that we're on the decline, but we're still significantly higher than we were in 2012, 14, and 15.
Yeah,
So
that's
just
true.
kind of interesting.
Somehow I didn't see that graphic. I wish I had. So,
Yeah.
point taken. But I do notice also that Group A crimes declined by 8.5% from 2014. Violent crimes have declined by 7% since 2014, even though they increased from 2017 to 2018. And total juvenile charges referrals declined a lot for both blacks and whites juveniles. I think it's important to kind of pay attention to the detail, and I guess I want to make a key point here. Earlier in one of the slides that Julie showed us, the slide showed a frame in front of, what was the building it was in front of? Well, anyhow, in front of a building that was in the photograph. And you were supposed to be able to stand behind the frame so that people could take photographs of you.
Oh, it was across the street.
Huh? Where is it?
At the
Across the street, the parking lot. Chauncey parking lot.
Oh, yeah, on the side of the parking lot, right. So the point I'm making is framing is really crucial, and with regard to something like the data concerning the incidence of crime, arrests, et cetera. We need to do a better job of framing, which is a way of drawing people's attention to certain things. You know, like if you're a photographer, you frame the photograph. If you're really good at it, you ask, what is it I'm really trying to take a photograph of, and then you frame it so that it's just right. Or when a person stands in the new framed thing by the Chauncey Swan parking lot, they'll be able to do that as well. But we can do it with regard to key things that we're doing so that we can draw the public's attention to what we're doing really well. And if something's bad, we have to deal with that too. But framing matters a lot.
And when you talk about that framing, Jim, I think one thing that's interesting in here is, because you talked about the juveniles, but when you look for the calls for service related to juveniles, those numbers have been going up. They've been trending up every single year. But the juvenile court services, referrals/charges, have been trending down, which off the top of my head says to me, our police are getting more calls related to juvenile issues, but a smaller percentage of those are resulting in juveniles being in the judicial system.
Which is a huge thing.
They're finding other ways to interact with juveniles and avoid them being in the judicial system. So framing, as you say, is very important.
The other thing, the overall data is interesting in terms of looking for trends and so forth, but I still am really interested in the GIS aspects of this data collection. Where are these data points being collected and what pattern they generate? Because it's not evenly distributed across the city. I mean, there are going to be unique patterns that, as I've often emphasized, at least from my experience, we all have different ways of experiencing Iowa City. There isn't one Iowa City. There are many Iowa cities, and I think some way of breaking that information down so it's a little bit more correlated with how people actually experience Iowa City would be helpful.
Okay, other items on that information packet? I'll mention item 6, minutes of the CPRB's May 14 meeting, where the boards will be recommending that the council appoint a liaison to the CPRB. And I guess we don't have to take any action on that until we get a formal recommendation from the board. but we have discussed the possibility of having liaisons to various boards and commissions before. Bruce, you weren't here when we did this, but this back in early 2016, we discussed that as a possibility, and at that time, the council decided not to do it. So in this case, one board is recommending that we assign a liaison to that particular board. So we'll have to process that and think it through.
I still was a little concerned about what they truly were asking us to do, to be a liaison, but it talked about concern about the makeup and function of their board, but I thought when they were here to talk about it, they talked kind of about the differences in decisions made with the police chief versus the CPRB, so I was a little concerned.
Well, that was part of that change that we made in the
Right.
ordinance, and I think to your first comment, Jim, I think the time to really talk about this is when we get the actual recommendation from them and see the wording.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And that topic will come up as we're having that
Exactly.
conversation. Okay, how about the May 30th packet?
Can we get to IP5?
Sure, go ahead. Which
Was
staff
staff
needs
going to?
guidance on, right? Simon, you're going to say
Yes.
something about this.
The tax abatement program. So this is one that staff has been working on with the committee from folks outside the organization as well for some time now. It was part of your Affordable Housing Action Plan from 2016. This is a provision in state code which allows property taxes to be abated on improved value for up to 10 years, and it can be up to 100% of those increased taxes. You have a lot of flexibility within that, what the percentage is, whether it's a sliding scale. We are also looking at this provision of state code for commercial tax abatement as well, which the Economic Development Committee heard a little bit about yesterday. So where we landed with this one, it was very hard to get it to pencil out in a way that really saw the provision of new affordable housing. To our knowledge, we're the only city in the state that is going to use this provision in state code explicitly for affordable housing. It's generally to inspire some type of development in communities that are seeing none. So we're trying to use this as an additional tool to inspire more affordable housing. So working with bankers and developers, we landed on a 40% tax abatement for the 10 years. It would have to be a multifamily development that included more than 6 units. That was the lowest threshold in which we could get it to pencil out that we would get at least 1 unit from that building and still be able to abate those taxes. The tenant must be at or below 60% of AMI, but the rent can't exceed what the 40% level would be. So the rents will be lower, but they will be allowed to pursue a little bit of broader tenant pool. The concern was that putting that number too low, that they wouldn't necessarily be able to fill those units. So that was the feedback we received on that. Just as the EDC heard yesterday, with the commercial tax abatement, we're looking to start this to be narrowly tailored. It is a by right for the developer. So if they check all the boxes that we put, all the parameters that we put on the program, they work directly with the assessor, and it doesn't come through us like a TIF project would be approved individually, or the parameters of that TIF project, a TIF incentive would be approved individually. So we're trying to start a little bit more conservative, see what we get out of it, and we are able to change that going forward to make it to make the incentive a little bit higher if we're not seeing the development of new housing that we want to.
Simon, I was wondering whether you could comment on who the committee consisted of. I know for our inclusionary zoning in riverfront crossings, we had sort of a coalition of developers and affordable housing advocates, and they were able to get a unanimous recommendation. Could you comment a little bit on who that community consisted of?
There were, and we did have some membership changeover that was close to a year and a half that the committee was meeting, so we did have some membership changeover in the interim. There were 2 development companies represented. One does, especially through the Housing Trust Fund, develop affordable housing. A couple of bankers as well to work on the numbers to see how we could get those to pencil out. And really, I feel like at least the staff's perspective was get as much out of this as we can. You know, the affordability component wasn't as much the issue as how can we get that affordable housing with this program that wasn't really designed for it. So it was really more focused on the numbers.
And did we have the affordable housing advocates as part of that committee or not?
I think other than the individual developer, I don't think that we did. I really feel like my role on that committee was the affordable housing advocate. But no, we didn't. It was really more about trying to get to see how the numbers would work.
Do you, when you're talking about the numbers, do you anticipate other funds will be utilized as well, like CDBG? Or
it could be used in concert with other programs, certainly with other funding sources. One of the parameters we're putting on it is that it can't be combined with TIF. It would be basically using the same increment as a TIF project, and frankly, we can incentivize affordable housing through a TIF project. But right now, we wouldn't need this program for that. But yeah, that's where we landed. And one other thing I will add to it, when you do create a tax abatement area, we don't have areas identified. We want to be able to use this citywide, or at least outside of riverfront crossings. But essentially, we'd be looking at what the proposed development was first and then creating the tax abatement area for that parcel. Part of the process when you create the area is you have to notify every property owner and every tenant within the area that you've delineated. So again, trying to start more conservatively. So effectively, we would expect that a developer would come to this, say, I have this parcel of land, I'd like to put up a 12-plex. We're going to make 15 to 20% of those affordable. Price the rent at 40%. Can we create the tax abatement district for this parcel?
And so you could create that tax abatement district just for that one parcel?
Yes, correct. And there have been cities that did that. I believe that the city of Coralville used that for a LIHTC project for Sand Company that's working with us currently, that they set up an abatement district just for that parcel.
Can you explain to me the rationale where, if I understand this, people up to either 60 or 80% would be eligible, but the rent is going to be limited to what a household at 40%.
Right.
Okay, so I guess what was the logic of somebody who's between that 40 and 60? I mean, they're getting a better benefit, obviously, of paying only the 40%, but kind of what was the logic as the...
Sure. The logic was that we wanted the incentive to be lucrative. We wanted to address the lower income area, lower AMI levels than we do through a lot of our 80 and 60%. But the concern was filling those units and having enough families to fill those units. And also, there is no clawback mechanism. You know, once they have this set up, they get it for the 10 years. And as hopefully families' incomes are increasing throughout those 10 years, that it became very problematic that you'd either, they'd have to find a new tenant or not renew a lease with somebody else. So, you know, ideally they're starting at the 35 or 40, and then as their income increases, they wouldn't necessarily have to find a new unit, but their rent wouldn't be able to be increased.
And the 10 years is set by statute, correct?
Yes, and we don't have to go the full 10 years. That was where we landed to make it pencil out. But frequently, especially with the commercial tax abatement, you'll see a 3 or 5 year schedule.
And the reason not being in riverfront crossings, can you tell us what that?
Sure. There were a couple of rationale for that. You know, one is that it is already a TIF district. It does have the inclusionary zoning requirement. So even a developer not asking for an incentive is going to be required to do the 10% in riverfront crossings. If we want to incentivize anything above the 10%, we already have the ability to do that using the same increment through TIF, and that would give you more control over an individual project. You'd have more negotiating leverage with that than you would with the tax abatement program.
And this isn't a new program. This has been around.
Yes, the state law has been in place, I think, 1979. something like that. But again, I think this is the first time that a community in Iowa has used it explicitly for affordable housing, and not just, it's generally used more like the workforce housing tax credit, where you're just trying to get more units online.
With regard to riverfront crossings, if I understand the proposal correctly, I feel uncomfortable with requiring developers in one district, riverfront crossings, to include affordable housing, requiring them to do it, and in another case, providing tax exemptions for developers to do it. That feels imbalanced, maybe even unfair to me, so I'd have to process that.
Sure.
To be persuaded it's a good idea.
The logic with that in riverfront crossings was that there was also significant upzoning. Oh, sorry.
No, I mean, we were just kind of all saying the same thing.
Upzoning.
The upzoning that we did with the form-based code in riverfront crossings was why we required that 10% affordable housing in riverfront crossings. So we kind of gave all the landowners, developers in that area a break, if you will, by that change in the code.
Good point. Thank you.
It was based on our zoning authority.
Yeah. Simon, can I go back just a minute? Because I want to follow up on my previous question. So as I read this, it's limited to people that are at 60% or below of the median income. But the rents are limited to the 40% level.
Correct.
Isn't that a disincentive to the developer that they could be renting to somebody who's at the 60% income level, but they can only charge the rent for somebody who's at the 40% income level?
Basically, we tried to push that rent as low as we could and still make it pencil out with what tax benefit the developer would likely see. So we did start at the 60% levels, such as with the inclusionary housing requirement in riverfront crossings, but then we found as we worked through the numbers that if we were willing to do 40% on the entire development in terms of tax abatement, we could push that rent a little bit lower.
All right, thank you.
I'm a little concerned also, and we're going to run out of time here. I don't think we're going to be able to finish this. That's the way it feels to me. But anyhow, I'm a little bit concerned by the one paragraph that says developers can request different terms, which as I read it was very open-ended. And I feel uncomfortable with that unless I'm persuaded not to be.
It would be similar to requests that you see now through a TIF project, or basically the only thing that comment is trying to get at is if they want something different than the parameters that are in this program, that's a completely different new discussion with City Council. That the parameters of this program are by right. So if this isn't lucrative enough for them, or they have something different in mind, that would just be a request to staff and council like any other request for incentives.
The urban revitalization area, which is the area in which the tax abatement applies, has to be established by the council. Mm-hmm. And those criteria have to be upfront as part of the establishment of the area.
But basically, this is where we would start as staff with any request for the tax abatement. And so long as you all are comfortable with those parameters, we would proceed preparing it for your consideration without basically coming back to you to ask for a negotiation. Whereas anything outside of these parameters would be a new discussion because you wouldn't have had the chance to weigh in on it yet.
Okay, do you folks feel like we know enough about this to say to staff, proceed and return to us with a specific proposal, or do we need to talk about it more after the formal meeting?
I'm comfortable. I guess my last question would be, so the program would be established. Will it be coming back to us in the form of a resolution or an ordinance at all, or?
Because
yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Because we're not setting up the abatement areas right now, or the urban revitalization area right now, those would all come back to you, similar to the urban renewal area process with the TIF.
Okay, so the outline of what it would take to get one would just be in staff documents that you could review with a developer, but if they wanted to go forward, you'd have to come back to get the area established.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And so then what
I would
you would
liken
be,
it. Oh, sorry.
So then what you would be telling somebody is if they didn't want to do what was in that plan, you couldn't negotiate with them without coming back to council and
Right.
looking at different terms?
Right.
Okay. So the 6 bullets are what we would be starting with unless council had more discussion.
We're not going to go through the process of setting up an urban revitalization area on terms other than these.
And we would
unless
see
you
that
approve it.
come back
Yeah.
once
Yes.
it becomes proposed as a district.
Right. So I'm comfortable. I'm
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
comfortable with
okay.
this.
I'm
We're
okay.
essentially asking for permission to market this.
Right.
You're going to have final say in creating it, but we want to market it, and we didn't want to get out in front of you before we did that.
I'm
And I
comfortable.
would liken it to our economic development policies. You know, when we're negotiating TIF, we know if we're putting money into it and it's residential, we're at 15% or more affordable housing. And that's just a parameter that staff knows is
Yeah,
in
I'm
place.
comfortable too.
All right, well, I have one other concern I want to just mention, and then we're going to have to stop prior to the formal meeting. Yesterday, in our Economic Development Committee meeting, we had a brief conversation about tax incentives relative to carbon emission reductions. And the gist of the conversation was that since we have a climate action plan that seeks to reduce carbon emissions on a steady glide path over the next, 30-plus years, that, I claim that we need to make sure our economic development incentives ensured that new construction was on that glide path. So I just wonder whether this particular incentive for affordable housing could also have an incentive built into it with regard to new housing construction. I don't want to push the point because it complicates things a lot right at the moment, but I have that concern and just need to put it out there. Okay, thanks, Simon.
Yep, thank you.
We will return to the May 30th information packet after the formal meeting, so we're going to adjourn this meeting now until 7 o'clock for our formal meeting. We stopped with the May 30th information packet.
IP5.
IP5 we had not finished. So the question was with regard to IP5, well, Charlie obviously raised a point that is relevant to the question at hand. So
I would certainly like to get the feedback.
I would suggest we give it a HCDC and wait for their response.
what did the rest of you think?
I'm okay with that.
Pauline?
I'm okay
Susan?
with that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. All right. Any other?
I do have one question for staff. Are there any time-sensitive items related to that?
Nope.
No.
The only time issue would be how soon we could get the program rolling, but
Okay.
no external time constraints.
And I assume that Simon would be able to participate in that process too, correct, with HCDC?
If that's what Jeff and Tracy decide, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'd like to bring up a point with regard to this, to IP number 3, which is the strategic plan, the list of pending topics. With regard to item 9, update on climate action activities, Jeff and I discussed this and decided that it would be good to have the update on climate action activities during one of our meetings in July, probably the second meeting, I would guess, but this is something that hasn't been decided, but you should expect to have it occur in July. And so I just wanted to make that point. And any other topics, folks? I think I have one more, but
The only, were you going to speak?
Go ahead.
Okay. The only comment that I would make is that IP3, or pending council work session topics, as we all know, we try to be as judicious as we can in terms of what goes in and what goes out. And for today's work session, it was a wonderful update on our capital improvement. It was terrific, but sort of moving forward, I'm really hopeful hopeful that we can allot most of that time for the pending work session topics, because I think we do have a lot of policy issues that come before us, and that is our opportunity to speak as a body as to these issues. So that's sort of my view, and I'm just hopeful that sort of moving forward that we not have quite as much just sort of updates of capital improvement when we have a number of work session topics that we need to get through.
Yeah. Okay, any other IP items on the May 30th information package?
IP7, the National League of Cities, State of Cities 2019, I thought had some interesting coverage on, a range of issues, various strategies cities have taken, certainly worth taking a look at.
Anything else?
IP8, I was just thinking about Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition Help for Gulfview residents. Jeff, do we have any update in terms of where we're at, or maybe that'd be Johnson County Affordable Housing Coalition in terms of this issue, in terms of mobile home policy, in terms of updating our affordable housing plan?
No, I don't have anything, but I'd be happy to reach out to Sarah and send you an update.
Okay.
Yeah, it's unfortunate Sarah left. Mazahir and I had been sort of selfly appointed to meet with them, and we hadn't heard from Sarah to get together, so I don't know that they have really done anything yet with that.
Okay, any other IP items? All right, I'm not hearing any, so that was the last thing we needed to do on the work session.
We've got the late handouts for KXIC.
KXIC, yes.
Correct, and I have volunteered for the 16th, is that right? Is that the date? 12th, thank you.
I'll take June 19th.
July 10th.
Do July 3rd?
June 26th.
We've got July 17th, 24th, and 31st.
I can do the 17th.
Are all of us accounted for? Well, Maz.
Except for Maz, but she's not back
She
till
won't be
August.
back, yeah. We could invite another staff person to fill one of them.
You want us to take both those, or just one?
Are they consecutive? I don't know if that's a great.
24th and 31st, right?
Yeah, why don't you do that?
Okay.
Okay, so we're good to go, huh? All right, I think we're done with our work session. Any objection? All right, we're done. Thank you.